Madame Fontaine's establishment on Bond Street was not merely a dress shop. It was a temple of silk and ambition, where London's most fashionable ladies gathered to worship at the altar of Parisian designs. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings, painted with cherubs and clouds, casting rainbows across bolts of fabric in every imaginable hue. Gilt-framed mirrors multiplied the splendor into infinity, while the air itself seemed expensive, perfumed with lavender water and the faint rustle of banknotes changing hands. Seren Fairfax had no business being here. She knew it the moment she stepped through the door, drawn by the emerald gown displayed in the window like a jewel in a crown. The color had stopped her mid-stride on the pavement, reminded her of her mother's eyes, of the dress her mother had worn in the portrait that now hung in a room they could no longer afford to heat. That portrait was one of the few things they hadn't sold yet, though Seren suspected it was only a matter of time. At 24, Seren had perfected the art of wanting things she could not have. She had learned to window shop with her hands clasped firmly behind her back, to admire without touching, to dream without hoping. But something about that emerald silk had called to her with a voice she couldn't ignore, and before her sensible mind could intervene, her feet had carried her inside. Now she stood near the back of the shop, partially hidden behind a display of silk flowers, pretending to examine a selection of ribbons, while the real customers conducted their business in clouds of expensive perfume and careless laughter. She told herself she would leave in just a moment, just one more look at the gown, and then she would return to reality. She was not unattractive. Her dark copper hair, unusual enough to draw second glances, was her mother's legacy. Her hazel eyes, which shifted between green and gold depending on the light, had been called striking by more than one would-be suitor during her first season 6 years ago. But that was before her father's investments had collapsed catastrophically, before the creditors had started circling, before the Fairfax family had begun its slow, dignified slide toward ruin. Striking eyes and unusual hair meant nothing when one's gloves were darned, and one's police was 3 seasons out of fashion. Money talked in London society, and the Fairfax family had long since lost their voice. "That shade would wash you out completely, Prudence dear. You need something warmer. Perhaps the apricot?" The voice belonged to Lady Whitmore, a woman of considerable fortune and even sharper opinions. She stood at the center of the shop like a general commanding troops, her daughter beside her, surrounded by an anxious flutter of shop assistants bearing fabric samples like offerings to a demanding deity. "But Mama, Lady Thornton wore apricot to the Harrington ball. I cannot possibly." "Lady Thornton is 40 and desperate. You are 18 and have options. The apricot." Serene allowed herself a small smile, hidden behind the silk flowers. She should leave. She had no money to spend, no reason to linger, and every moment she remained increased the risk of someone recognizing her and whispering about how far the Fairfax family had fallen. The whispers were always the worst part. Not the poverty itself, but the pity in people's eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. But then her eyes found the emerald gown again, now displayed on a dressmaker's form near the window, and her feet refused to move toward the door. Up close, it was even more exquisite than she had imagined. The bodice was embroidered with tiny seed pearls that caught the light like morning dew on spring grass. The skirt fell in elegant folds that seemed to move even while perfectly still, whispering promises of ballrooms and waltzes and a life Seren had long since accepted she would never have. Without thinking, she reached out and touched the fabric. Just once. Just to know how it felt beneath her fingers. Silk and dreams and impossible longing. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Seren turned to find one of Madame Fontaine's assistants bearing down on her, a thin woman with a pinched face and nostrils flared, as though she had detected something unpleasant. "May I help you with something?" The words were polite, The tone suggested Seren should be helped directly out the door and preferably into the gutter. I was merely admiring. That particular gown is 200 guineas. The assistant's eyes traveled slowly down Seren's outdated pelisse, her mended gloves, and her boots that had been resoled twice. The inspection was thorough and utterly damning. Perhaps you might be more comfortable in one of the shops on the side streets. They cater to a different sort of clientele. Heat flooded Seren's cheeks. She should simply leave, accept the dismissal with what remained of her dignity, and retreat before this became any more humiliating. But something in the assistant's smug expression, something in the casual cruelty of being deemed unworthy to even look at beautiful things, sparked a flame of defiance that years of genteel poverty had not quite managed to extinguish. I am perfectly comfortable here, thank you. The assistant's eyebrows rose toward her hairline. The slight commotion had attracted attention. Lady Whitmore turned from her apricot deliberations, her gaze sharpening with interest at the prospect of witnessing someone else's misfortune. Is there a problem, Colette? Madame Fontaine herself emerged from the back of the shop, a formidable woman in black silk who had built her empire on knowing exactly who could afford her creations and who was wasting her valuable time. This person was handling the emerald gown, madame. Handling? Seren's voice remained steady despite her hammering heart. I touched it once. I hardly think that constitutes a criminal offense. That gown, Madame Fontaine said coldly, her eyes taking in Seren's shabby appearance with one dismissive glance, is not for public handling. It is an exclusive creation. I wasn't aware fabric could be damaged by a single touch. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the shop. Ladies paused in their browsing to watch. Lady Whitmore's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever, only the anticipation of entertainment at another's expense. My dear girl, Lady Whitmore interjected, her voice carrying that particular sweetness reserved for delivering killing blows. Surely you can see that gown is far beyond your circumstances. One must know one's place in society. It saves everyone such awkwardness. I know my place perfectly well, Lady Whitmore. Do you? The older woman's eyes glittered with malice barely concealed. Then you know it is not here, pretending to shop for gowns you could not afford in a lifetime of saving. Run along, dear. This is a place for ladies of quality, not charity cases hoping to touch their betters' belongings. The words landed like slaps across her face. Seren felt every eye in the shop upon her, felt the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. The whispers had started in earnest now, a chorus of cruelty. Isn't that the Fairfax girl? Dreadful business with the father's investments. Surprised she shows her face in decent society. I heard they've sold nearly everything. Seren's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. She would not cry. She absolutely would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. She turned to leave, to flee this temple of silk that had become a chamber of humiliation, her only thought to escape before she shattered completely, and walked directly into a wall of expensive, superfine wool. I beg your pardon. She looked up, and up. The man before her was tall enough that she had to crane her neck to see his face. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through it in thought. A face composed of sharp angles and aristocratic bones, the kind of face that belonged on Roman coins or marble statues in museums, and eyes, gray as storm clouds before lightning strikes, that were currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Are you quite all right? His voice was deep and carried an unmistakable note of authority, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Yes, I was just leaving. Were you? His head tilted slightly, those penetrating eyes studying her face with an interest she couldn't interpret. That would be most unfortunate. I've only just arrived." Before Seren could make sense of that peculiar statement, he stepped around her and turned to face the shop. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Madame Fontaine. His tone transformed the name into something between a greeting and a command. "The emerald gown in the window. I'll take it." Madame Fontaine's face underwent a remarkable transformation, shifting from cold disdain to fawning delight in the space of a heartbeat. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honor. Of course. But I must inform you, that particular piece was commissioned by—" "Was it?" The Duke, for he could be nothing else with that bearing and that voice, raised one dark eyebrow. "Then uncommission it. I'm certain whoever ordered it can find something else to wear. The emerald gown is now spoken for." He turned back to Seren, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "For my fiancée." The shop fell utterly, completely silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving, and Seren Fairfax, who had entered this establishment, wanting nothing more than to touch a dream, found herself staring into the eyes of a stranger who had just claimed her as his own. "I beg your pardon?" Seren's voice emerged as barely a whisper, her mind struggling to process the words she had just heard. "You heard me perfectly well." The Duke's expression remained unreadable, a mask of aristocratic composure that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "The gown is for my fiancée, which, as of this moment, is you." Lady Whitmore made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a kettle reaching boil. Her face had gone an alarming shade of puce that clashed terribly with her expensive gown. "Your Grace, surely you cannot be serious. This girl is nobody. She's—" "This girl," he interrupted, without looking away from Seren, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "is the woman I intend to marry. I suggest you adjust your tone accordingly, Lady Whitmore. My future Duchess deserves your respect, not your contempt." Future Duchess. The words echoed in Serene's mind like bells ringing in an empty cathedral. This couldn't be happening. She had stepped into a dress shop and stumbled into madness. "Play along," he murmured, leaning close enough that his breath stirred the loose tendrils of hair near her ear. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I'll explain everything, I promise. But right now, I need you to smile as though you're not contemplating my murder." It was perhaps the most absurd request anyone had ever made of her, and yet something in his voice, some undercurrent of urgency beneath the aristocratic command, made her pause. She thought of Lady Whitmore's cruel smile, of the whispers that followed her everywhere like shadows she couldn't escape. She thought of her father's haunted eyes when he thought no one was watching, the way he aged a little more each month under the weight of debts he couldn't pay. She thought of her mother quietly selling family heirlooms piece by piece, pretending it didn't break her heart each time another treasure disappeared. She thought of how it would feel, just once, to be the one wielding power instead of being crushed beneath it. Seren smiled. It felt strange on her face, this expression of joy she didn't feel, but she made it convincing. "Darling," she said, surprised by how steady her voice emerged. "You were supposed to meet me here an hour ago. I've been waiting." Something sparked in those gray eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise that she had risen to the challenge so readily. "Forgive me." He took her hand and raised it to his lips in a gesture so smooth it seemed rehearsed, yet somehow genuine. The brush of his mouth against her knuckles sent an unexpected jolt through her. "Estate business delayed me. You know how these things are." "I do." She had no idea, but she was committed now, caught up in whatever mad game he was playing. The Duke turned back to Madame Fontaine, who stood frozen in place, her carefully cultivated composure shattered by this unexpected turn of events. "The gown will be delivered to Thornfield House by this evening. Send the bill to my secretary. And Madame?" His voice dropped to something approaching dangerous, soft as velvet wrapped around steel. "I trust we can rely on your absolute discretion regarding my private affairs. I should hate for rumors to circulate before we've made our formal announcement to society. Of course, Your Grace. Complete discretion. You have my word. My solemn word." "Excellent." He tucked Seren's hand into the crook of his arm with proprietary ease and steered her toward the door. "Come, my dear. We have much to discuss." They were outside on the pavement before Seren could properly process what had happened. The Duke handed her into a waiting carriage with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to such gestures, then climbed in after her and rapped sharply on the roof. The carriage lurched into motion, carrying her away from the shop and into the unknown. "Who are you?" Seren demanded the moment they were moving, her composure cracking now that they were away from watching eyes. "What do you want from me? And why in heaven's name did you just tell everyone in that shop that we're engaged?" 3 excellent questions, and all deserving of answers. The Duke leaned back against the velvet seats, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "My name is Caius Vane, Duke of Thornfield. What I want is considerably more complicated to explain. And I told them we're engaged because I find myself in desperate need of a fiancé by sundown, and you happen to be conveniently available." "Conveniently?" Seren sputtered, outrage temporarily overwhelming her confusion. "I am not some item to be purchased alongside a gown." "No," he agreed, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're considerably more valuable than any gown. A gown costs 200 guineas. He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I'm prepared to offer you 20,000 pounds. The number hit her like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs. 20,000 pounds. Enough to pay her father's debts 3 times over. Enough to restore their crumbling estate. Enough to give her brother Tobias the education he deserved. Enough to let her mother hold her head high in society again." "You're mad," she whispered. "Frequently," the Duke agreed without a trace of humor. "But not about this. I have a problem, Miss Fairfax, and you, whether you realize it or not, are the perfect solution." The following morning, Serene arrived at Thornfield House to finalize terms, her stomach churning with a volatile mixture of hope and terror. Her mother had wept when Seren told her about the Duke's proposition. Then she had laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Then she had wept again. "You cannot possibly," her mother had said, wringing her hands. "It's indecent. It's scandalous. It's 5,000 pounds already promised upon agreement," Seren had replied quietly, "and 15,000 more when it's finished." That had silenced the objections rather effectively. Now, standing before Thornfield House in the morning light, Seren wondered if she had lost her mind entirely. The residence rose before her like a monument to old wealth and older power, all elegant Georgian lines and gleaming windows. It was the sort of house that made her family's estate look like a country cottage by comparison. A butler admitted her with such perfect dignity that she felt immediately underdressed, despite wearing her best morning gown. He led her through corridors hung with paintings that probably cost more than everything her family still owned combined, and into a study that somehow managed to feel lived in despite its grandeur. Papers scattered across a massive oak desk, a half-empty teacup, gone cold, reading spectacles abandoned atop an open volume of Marcus Aurelius, the signs of an active mind temporarily interrupted. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, was the Duke of Thornfield. He turned when she entered, and Seren was struck again by how commanding his presence was. Not just tall, but substantial, in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He filled the room simply by being in it. "Miss Fairfax, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, as though ready to flee at a moment's notice. Perhaps she was, You said you would explain everything, Your Grace, and I shall." He moved to sit across from her, his gray eyes studying her face with that unsettling intensity. "Tell me, Miss Fairfax, what do you know about the Thornfield succession?" "Only what everyone knows. The Duke of Thornfield is one of the wealthiest men in England. His seat in Parliament holds considerable influence, and he has remained stubbornly unmarried to the despair of every ambitious mother in the country." She paused, meeting his eyes. "That would be you, I presume." "It would." He didn't smile, but something in his expression suggested he appreciated her directness. "What you don't know, what very few people know, is that my father's will contained a rather unusual provision. If I do not marry before my 33rd birthday, the bulk of the Thornfield estate transfers to my cousin, Ambrose Vane." Seren frowned. "That seems highly unusual, and rather unfair." "My father was an unusual man. He was also convinced that I would waste my life in scholarly pursuits and philosophical contemplation unless forced to take responsibility for the family legacy." Caius's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He was not entirely wrong about my inclinations, I admit. But what he failed to consider was the character of my cousin. Ambrose is a wastrel, a gambler, and a scoundrel who would strip the estates bare within 5 years. The tenants, the servants, everyone who depends on Thornfield for their livelihood would suffer immeasurably. "And your birthday?" 3 months from now, the 15th of September. Understanding began to dawn, bringing with it a complicated tangle of emotions. "So you need a bride, quickly." "I need a fiancé," he corrected carefully. "Someone willing to play the role convincingly until after my birthday, at which point the inheritance will be secured, and we can dissolve the engagement quietly. No scandal, no complications. The estate will be safe. Ambrose will be thwarted, and you will be considerably wealthier than when we began." "Except," Seren said slowly, her mind working through the implications, "the woman who pretends to be engaged to a duke and is then publicly discarded. Her reputation would be destroyed. She would be pitied at best, scorned at worst. Her prospects for a real marriage would evaporate entirely. Which is why the compensation must be substantial enough to make such concerns irrelevant." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. £20,000, Miss Fairfax. Enough to resolve your family's financial difficulties permanently. Your father's debts paid in full. Your brother's education secured. Your mother free to hold her head high in society again, regardless of whispers about broken engagements. Seren's heart hammered against her ribs. "You've investigated my family quite thoroughly." "I have. I needed someone whose circumstances would make this arrangement genuinely mutually beneficial. Someone intelligent enough to play the role convincingly under society's scrutiny. Someone with enough pride to maintain absolute discretion." He paused. "And I confess, someone with enough desperation to seriously consider an offer that most would dismiss as madness." Desperation. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you see when you look at me?" Something shifted in his expression, softening almost imperceptibly. "No. What I see is a woman who walked into a shop she couldn't afford because she refused to let circumstances crush her spirit entirely. A woman who stood her ground against Lady Whitmore's cruelty when most would have fled in tears. A woman who, when handed the most absurd situation imaginable by a complete stranger, had the presence of mind to play along and ask questions later." He paused. "I see someone remarkable, Miss Fairfax. I simply happen to also see someone who needs money as desperately as I need a fiancé." Seren's throat tightened unexpectedly. It was, perhaps, the most honest assessment of her situation anyone had ever offered. Why me specifically? London is full of impoverished gentlewomen who would leap at such an offer without asking half as many questions. Because most of them would fall in love with me. She nearly choked on air. Your arrogance is truly breathtaking, Your Grace. It's not arrogance, it's observation. I am a duke. I am wealthy, titled, and not entirely unfortunate in appearance. Women look at me and see a fantasy, a fairy tale ending. They would complicate this arrangement with romantic expectations and broken hearts. His gaze held hers steadily. You looked at me in that shop, with suspicion and irritation. Not a hint of swooning. It was remarkably refreshing. Perhaps I was simply too angry to swoon. Perhaps. Or perhaps you're simply too intelligent to be dazzled by a title. That's precisely what I need. Someone who will view this as a business arrangement, and absolutely nothing more. Seren was quiet for a long moment, weighing impossible choices. If I agree, she said carefully. Separate chambers, complete propriety maintained at all times. Obviously. My family receives the first payment immediately, as proof of good faith. He nodded. 5,000 upon agreement, the remainder upon successful completion. And if you decide to end the arrangement early for any reason, I keep what's already been paid. Agreed. Seren drew a steadying breath. This was madness, complete and utter madness. Then we have an arrangement, Your Grace. Chaos, he said. If we're to be convincing as an engaged couple, you should probably use my given name, at least in private. Chaos. The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for strangers. And you should call me Seren. Very well, Seren. He rose and extended his hand. I'll send a carriage tomorrow morning. You'll move into Thornfield House immediately. My mother will serve as chaperone to ensure propriety. Your mother knows about this arrangement? For the first time, his composure wavered slightly. A flicker of something that might have been apprehension crossed his features. My mother, he said carefully, orchestrated it. Thornfield House was not a residence. It was a statement of power written in stone and glass, and centuries of accumulated wealth. Seren stood before it the following morning, watching her single shabby trunk being carried inside by livered footmen, and wondered if she had made the most catastrophic mistake of her life. The house rose 4 stories of pale Portland stone, its windows glittering in the morning light like dozens of watchful eyes. Everything about it whispered of permanence, of belonging, of a world she had never been part of and never would be. Her mother had wept again when the carriage came to collect her. Happy tears this time, or so she claimed. Write to me every day, her mother had instructed, clutching Seren's hands. Tell me everything, and for heaven's sake, don't do anything to ruin this opportunity. As if Seren needed reminding that her entire family's future now rested on her ability to play a convincing role for 3 months. The butler who admitted her was a silver-haired monument of dignity named Harwick. His expression revealed nothing whatsoever as he escorted her through an entrance hall dominated by a sweeping marble staircase and artwork that belonged in museums, not private homes. If he had opinions about the Duke's sudden engagement to an unknown woman of modest means, he kept them perfectly hidden behind decades of professional training. They had barely reached the main corridor when a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Where is she? Where is this mysterious creature who has somehow captured my impossible son's attention? The woman who swept toward them was perhaps 60, dressed in violet silk that rustled with every decisive step. Her silver hair was arranged elaborately, streaked with a dramatic dark stripe that seemed entirely intentional. She was not tall, but she moved with such commanding energy that she seemed to fill the entire corridor. Sharp blue eyes, nothing like Caius's gray ones, fixed on Seren with the intensity of a scientist examining a new and potentially fascinating specimen. Mother, came Caius's voice from somewhere behind Seren. She turned to find him descending the staircase, looking resigned. I see you've already found her. How unexpected. Don't be impertinent, darling. I've been waiting all morning. The Dowager Duchess completed her approach and began circling Seren slowly, examining her from every conceivable angle. The hair is extraordinary. Natural color, I assume. Good. Can't abide artifice. Bone structure is excellent. Intelligent eyes. You're not conventionally pretty, but you're striking. Men will notice you. Women will envy you. This could work. Mother, Caius said with audible patience, perhaps you might introduce yourself before conducting a full inspection. Oh, very well. I am Isolde Vane, the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield. You may call me Isolde in private, and your grace in public. Now then. She stopped directly in front of Seren. Tell me, Miss Fairfax, are you in love with my son? The question was so direct, so utterly without preamble, that Seren answered honestly before she could think better of it. No. Wonderful. Isolde's smile was sharp and genuinely pleased. I despise simpering romantics. They're so tedious and inevitably disappointing. Now come along. We have much to discuss and very little time to waste. The next hour was the most thorough interrogation Seren had ever experienced, conducted over tea in a drawing room that could have swallowed her family's entire ground floor. The Dowager Duchess extracted information with surgical precision. Her education? Adequate, Isolde pronounced. Her accomplishments? Piano, watercolors, languages. Her family history? Unfortunate but not scandalous. And her opinions on everything from parliamentary reform to the proper method of preparing tea. By the end, Seren felt simultaneously exhausted and oddly exhilarated. Isolde Vane was terrifying, but she was also brilliant, sharp-witted, and refreshingly honest in ways that society rarely permitted. She'll do, Isolde announced to her son, who had been observing the interrogation with barely concealed amusement. More than do, actually. She's quick, she's composed, and she doesn't flatter unnecessarily. The ton will be fascinated by her. I'm gratified by your approval, Seren said dryly, unable to resist. Isolde laughed, a sharp, delighted sound that transformed her severe features. Oh, I do like her, Caius. Finally, a woman who talks back. Don't let this one escape. Dinner that evening was served in a formal dining room that seated 40, though only 3 places were set at one end of the enormous table. Crystal and silver gleamed beneath candlelight. Footmen moved silently, appearing and disappearing with courses like well-trained ghosts. You're very quiet, Caius observed over the soup course. I'm concentrating on not using the wrong spoon. There appear to be 7 of them. His lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Only 4 courses tonight. Hardly a challenge. For you, perhaps. I'm accustomed to considerably simpler dining. By dessert, the conversation had somehow evolved from awkward small talk into a genuine discussion ranging from political reform to recent scientific discoveries to a spirited debate about whether Byron's poetry was genius or self-indulgent nonsense. The library is at your disposal, Caius said as they rose from the table. I generally spend my evenings there when not required elsewhere. You're welcome to join me, though I understand if you prefer solitude. It was clearly meant as polite distance, an acknowledgement that she wasn't obligated to spend every moment in his company, simply because they were pretending to be engaged. But Seren found herself curious, and perhaps, after the exhausting performance of appearing confident all day, she wanted to see what the Duke of Thornfield was like when he wasn't performing either. I'd like to see this library, she said. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, rolling ladders to reach the highest shelves, comfortable chairs positioned near windows and fireplaces. It was a room designed for reading, for thinking, for losing oneself in words and ideas. Serene's breath caught as she took it in. You may read anything here, Caius said, watching her reaction with something that looked almost like pleasure. I only ask that volumes be returned to their proper places." Their fingers brushed as he handed her a book he'd selected from a nearby shelf. The contact was brief, barely a whisper of skin against skin. Seren pulled back quickly, suddenly very aware of how alone they were. 3 months, she reminded herself firmly. She could survive 3 months of anything. 1 week into her residence at Thornfield House, Seren faced her first true test, the Whitmore Ball. Of all the events on London's social calendar, this was perhaps the cruelest irony imaginable. Lady Whitmore, the very woman who had humiliated her so thoroughly in Madame Fontaine's shop, was hosting the season's most anticipated ball, and Seren would walk through those doors on the arm of a duke. "Nervous?" Caius asked, as their carriage approached the blaze of lights that was Whitmore Manor. "Terrified," she admitted, seeing no point in pretense. "But also, I confess, slightly anticipating Lady Whitmore's expression when we arrive." He laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that she had come to recognize as rare. "There's that backbone I admired from the start." The emerald gown, which had arrived from Madame Fontaine's precisely as promised, rustled softly as Seren adjusted her borrowed gloves. Isolde had insisted on lending her jewels for the evening, emeralds and diamonds that felt impossibly heavy around her throat and at her ears. The woman staring back at her from the carriage window looked like a stranger, someone polished and elegant and belonging. "Remember," Caius murmured as the carriage stopped and footmen moved to open the doors. "Stay close to me. Follow my lead. And if anyone asks how we met..." "We were introduced at a private gathering by a mutual acquaintance who values discretion." Seren recited the story they had rehearsed. "We discovered shared intellectual interests and a compatibility of temperament. You were captivated by my unconventional mind. I was charmed by the depth beneath your ducal reserve. You make me sound like something from a romantic novel. Would you prefer I tell them you purchased me along with a gown?" His lips pressed together, suppressing a smile. "Perhaps not." The moment they entered the ballroom, conversation faltered and died. Heads turned in waves, like wheat bending before wind. Whispers erupted, spreading outward from their point of entry like ripples across still water. Lady Whitmore descended upon them with the speed of a hawk, spotting prey, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Grace, what an honor that you could attend." Her eyes slid to Seren, widening with recognition. Something ugly flickered in their depths before being hastily concealed. "And this must be your fiancé. I believe we've met before, though I confess I don't quite recall where." "We have indeed met," Seren said evenly, refusing to look away. "At Madame Fontaine's establishment. You were kind enough to offer advice about knowing one's place." Lady Whitmore's smile turned brittle as old ice. "Have you indeed met before?" Caius's tone was pleasant and absolutely lethal. "Then you'll already know what an extraordinary woman Miss Fairfax is. How fortunate that you recognized her quality before anyone else did." The barb landed precisely as intended. Lady Whitmore's face flushed with suppressed fury that she couldn't express without creating a scene. "I promised my fiancé the first dance," Caius continued smoothly. "You'll excuse us, I'm sure." He swept Seren onto the dance floor before Lady Whitmore could formulate a response, positioning them in the center where everyone could see. "You're enjoying this entirely too much," Seren accused, as they took their positions for the waltz. "Immensely," he admitted without shame. "You should have seen her face. I don't think anyone has dismissed her so efficiently in decades." The music began, and Seren discovered that dancing with Caius was both easier and harder than she had anticipated. Easier because he was an excellent lead, guiding her through the steps with effortless authority, his hand warm and steady at her waist. Harder because being this close to him, feeling the heat of his body through their formal clothes, breathing in the scent of his cologne, made coherent thought surprisingly difficult. "They're all watching," she murmured. "Let them watch. Tonight, you're untouchable. The Duke of Thornfield's intended. No one would dare slight you now." He was right. As the evening progressed, Seren found herself treated with a deference that bordered on reverence. Ladies who had looked through her for years now sought her conversation, complimenting her gown and asking pointed questions about the engagement. Gentlemen who had never deigned to acknowledge her existence lined up to request dances. Through it all, she kept finding her gaze drawn back to Caius across the crowded room. And more than once, she caught him watching her in return. In the carriage home, they sat in weighted silence. The evening's excitement had faded, leaving something more complicated in its wake. "Thank you," Seren said finally, "for tonight. For all of it. You did the work. I merely provided the stage." "No." She met his eyes in the dim light filtering through the carriage windows. "You gave me back something I'd lost years ago. I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter, to be seen rather than overlooked." Caius was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual, stripped of its customary polish. "You should never have been invisible in the first place. The fault lies with those too blind to see your worth." The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestones. Neither of them spoke again until they reached Thornfield House, but something between them had changed irrevocably. 6 weeks passed, like water through fingers, swift and impossible to hold. Serene had expected the time to drag, each day a tedious performance to be endured until she could claim her payment and return to her real life. Instead, she found herself startled by how quickly the weeks disappeared, and more troubling still, how little she wanted them to end. They had fallen into routines without meaning to, patterns of domesticity that felt increasingly natural. Mornings began in the breakfast room, where Caius read parliamentary reports and political correspondence, while Seren worked through the social invitations and household matters that had somehow become her responsibility. He took his coffee black and strong. She preferred chocolate with a splash of cream. He was irritable and taciturn before his first cup. She was cheerful in a way that clearly annoyed him. They had established this dynamic within the first week and adapted accordingly, dancing around each other with the easy familiarity of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Afternoons separated them. Caius to Parliament or estate business, meetings with solicitors and tenants, and political allies. Seren to charitable calls with Isolde, or quiet hours in the library that had become her sanctuary. She had worked her way through a substantial portion of the philosophy section and started on the histories, losing herself in worlds far removed from the complicated one she currently inhabited. But evenings were when her resolve weakened. They gathered in the library after dinner, Isolde retiring early with knowing smiles that Seren tried not to examine too closely. And there, surrounded by books and firelight, they talked. Philosophy and politics, the irritating habits of various society matrons, Caius's frustrations with parliamentary colleagues who valued tradition over human welfare, Seren's theories about educational reform that made him lean forward with genuine interest. They argued about ideas with a passion that surprised them both, challenged each other's assumptions, laughed at shared observations about the absurdities of their world. She learned that he took his responsibilities far more seriously than his sardonic exterior suggested. The tenant farmers on his estates received fair treatment and modern improvements. His speeches in the House of Lords advocated passionately for factory reform and children's welfare. Beneath the ducal arrogance was a man who genuinely cared about making the world better, even when the world seemed determined to resist improvement. He learned that she was hopeless at embroidery, but could calculate compound interest in her head faster than his accountant. That she cried at certain poems, but remained stoic through genuine tragedy. That she hummed tunelessly when concentrating and tapped her fingers against her knee when anxious. Small intimacies, accumulating weight, building something neither of them had intended. "You're staring," Caius said one evening without looking up from his book. Seren startled, heat rising to her cheeks. She had been watching him, she realized, observing the way firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, the way his long fingers turned pages with unconscious grace, the way a lock of dark hair fell across his forehead when he forgot to push it back. "I was thinking about the Harrington dinner tomorrow," she said quickly. "Whether Lady Harrington will serve that dreadful fish course again." "Were you?" He did look up then, one dark eyebrow raised, his gray eyes seeing far too much. "You were thinking about something considerably more troubling than Lady Harrington's menu." She should deny it, laugh it off, redirect the conversation to safer territory. Instead, she heard herself say, "I was thinking that 6 weeks ago you didn't exist to me. You were just a title, a name in society columns I never read. And now, I can't imagine my days without these evenings, without these conversations." The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and honest and impossible to take back. Caius was very still, his book forgotten in his hands. "Seren, forget I said anything." She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her tea. "It's late. I should retire. We have a busy day tomorrow, and I need—" "Wait." He rose, too, crossing the space between them with long strides. "Don't run from this. Not now." "I'm not running. I'm being practical." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "We agreed this was business, a transaction. I'm simply confused by the proximity, the performance. It's easy to forget what's real and what's pretend when you're pretending every moment of every day. Is it still pretend?" He was close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, and close enough to smell his cologne. "Because I've been trying to convince myself of exactly the same thing, and I've been failing spectacularly." Her heart hammered against her ribs. A knock at the library door shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart as Harwick entered, his expression carefully blank in the way of servants who have seen everything and chosen to acknowledge nothing. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. An urgent message has arrived from Mr. Ambrose Vane. He requests an immediate audience tomorrow morning." Harwick paused delicately. "He says it concerns the validity of your engagement." The blood drained from Seren's face. Caius's expression hardened to stone, all trace of vulnerability vanishing behind the ducal mask. "Tell my cousin I'll receive him at 10 o'clock sharp. And Harwick, prepare the formal drawing room. I want witnesses for whatever game he's planning to play." The butler withdrew, leaving them alone in a silence that felt entirely different from the charged intimacy of moments before. "What does he know?" Serene asked quietly. Caius met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, she glimpsed something like fear beneath the carefully maintained composure. "I don't know. But whatever it is, whatever he's planning, we face it together." Together. The word should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like the first warning of a coming storm. Ambrose Vane arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, dressed in clothes that cost more than most men earned in a year, and wearing a smile that made Seren's skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. He was handsome in a dissolute way, with the same dark hair as Caius, but none of the sharp intelligence in his eyes. Where Caius radiated controlled power and purpose, Ambrose exuded something oily and calculating, the look of a man who had never earned anything in his life and resented those who had. "Cousin." He swept into the formal drawing room with theatrical flourish, ignoring the chairs that had been arranged for proper conversation. "And the mysterious Miss Fairfax. What a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. I've heard so much about you from society's wagging tongues." "Ambrose." Caius's voice could have frozen the Thames solid. "State your business. I have a busy schedule, and I don't intend to waste my morning on pleasantries." Straight to the point. How refreshingly direct of you. Ambrose settled into a chair without being invited, crossing his legs with deliberate insolence. Very well. I'll be equally direct. I know your engagement is a sham, a carefully constructed fiction designed to cheat me out of my rightful inheritance. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Serene forced herself to remain motionless, to betray nothing through expression or posture. That's a serious accusation, Caius said quietly, his tone dangerous. One might even call it defamatory. It's only defamation if it's false. Ambrose's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. You see, cousin, I've been doing some research. Quite thorough research, as it happens. Miss Fairfax's family owes considerable debts. Debts that were mysteriously addressed exactly 3 days after your engagement was announced. Curious timing, wouldn't you agree? My fiancé's family finances are none of your concern. They become my concern when they suggest fraud. Ambrose leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malicious triumph. I have statements from witnesses at Madame Fontaine's establishment. You walked into that shop, purchased an obscenely expensive gown, and claimed Miss Fairfax as your fiancée within minutes of meeting her. No prior courtship, no prior acquaintance, no prior anything. Your point? Caius's voice was ice. My point is that this engagement is nothing more than a commercial arrangement designed to circumvent Uncle's will. A transaction, dressed up in romance for society's benefit. Ambrose rose, straightening his cuffs with affected casualness. And I intend to prove it. By the time I'm finished, every drawing room in London will know the Duke of Thornfield was so desperate to keep his fortune that he purchased himself a bride from a dress shop. Get out. Caius's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more threat than a shout. Certainly. I'll see myself out. Ambrose paused at the door, savoring his moment. But consider this, cousin. The scandal will destroy Miss Fairfax's reputation completely. Her family will be ruined, socially, as well as financially. They'll never recover from the shame. Is your precious inheritance really worth that price? He left before Caius could respond, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like a retreating threat. The silence that followed was suffocating. He's right, Seren whispered, her voice barely audible. If he proves it, if he convinces society, he won't. You don't know that. He has witnesses. He has the timing of the payments. He has circumstantial evidence and malicious intent. Caius turned to face her, his expression fierce. We can fight this. We will fight this. How? By lying more convincingly? By building more elaborate deceptions upon deceptions? By standing together. He crossed to her and took her hands in his. The contact was warm and steadying. I won't let him destroy you, Seren. Whatever happens, whatever I have to do, I will protect you from this. Last night, she said softly, searching his face. Before Harwick interrupted us, you were about to say something. I was about to make a fool of myself. Were you? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He no longer tried to hide. I was about to tell you that somewhere in the last 6 weeks, I stopped pretending. That when I look at you, I don't see an arrangement anymore, or a solution to my problems. I see someone I can't imagine losing. Someone who makes every room brighter simply by being in it. He stopped, jaw tight. Someone you what? She whispered. He leaned closer, his forehead coming to rest gently against hers. Someone I've fallen in love with, against all logic, against all intention, completely and irrevocably. Tears pricked at her eyes. It's real for me too, she whispered back. The kiss was gentle and inevitable, a promise made without words, a beginning that felt terrifyingly like it might also be an ending. They had no idea what tomorrow would bring, no certainty that their fragile happiness could survive Ambrose's machinations. But for this moment, they had each other. It would have to be enough. 3 days later, everything fell apart. Seren was in the library, attempting to read, but unable to focus on the words swimming before her eyes, when Isolde found her. The Dowager Duchess's face was pale beneath her careful powder, her usual commanding presence subdued by something that looked horribly like fear. "You need to see this." She thrust a printed sheet into Serene's hands. "It's being distributed throughout the gentlemen's clubs as we speak. By tomorrow morning, it will be in every drawing room in London." It was a satirical print, crudely drawn but devastatingly effective. A caricature of Caius, recognizable by his height and dark hair, standing at an auction block. Before him, a woman dressed as a bride held a price tag. The caption read, "The Duke's bargain, how much for a bride?" Serene's hands began to shake. "There's more." Isolde's voice was heavy with dread. "Lady Whitmore is hosting a salon this afternoon. An emergency gathering, she's calling it. She's invited half the ton to hear revelations about the Thornfield engagement. Ambrose will be there as her special guest. He's going to expose us publicly. He's going to try." Serene set down the vicious print with numb fingers. "Where is Caius?" "Parliamentary session. An important vote on the factory reform bill he's been championing for months. I've sent word, but even if he leaves immediately, he won't return in time to stop the salon. Lady Whitmore scheduled it deliberately." The walls seemed to close in around her. Everything they'd built, the careful performance, the growing truth beneath it, all of it crumbling to ash. "I should leave," Serene said, the words emerging flat and certain. "What?" "If I disappear before the salon begins, if I'm not here when the accusations are made, Caius can deny everything. He can say I was an imposter, a fortune hunter who deceived him. It protects his reputation, his inheritance, everything he's worked to preserve, and destroys yours utterly. My reputation was already in tatters. This merely confirms what society always believed about me." Serene's voice steadied, even as her heart shattered. "I can survive disgrace. I've been surviving it for years. But Caius has responsibilities beyond himself. Tenants who depend on him. Political work that matters. I won't be the anchor that drags him down." Isolde was quiet for a long moment, studying Serene with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You love him," she said finally. Not a question. Yes, the admission cost her everything. Which is exactly why I have to go. "You foolish, brave, remarkable girl." Isolde grasped her hands tightly. "Do you really think my son would accept your sacrifice? Do you think he would choose his fortune and reputation over you? It's not his choice to make. I'm making it for both of us." "Then make a different choice." Isolde's grip tightened. "Fight, Serene. Not by running away like a coward, but by standing your ground like the woman I know you are. Walk into that salon yourself, before Ambrose can make his accusations. Take control of the narrative. And say what exactly? That our engagement is entirely genuine? They won't believe me. Then tell them the truth that matters. Tell them you fell in love." Isolde's eyes blazed with sudden fierce determination. "Tell them that whatever arrangement brought you together, what exists between you now, is real. Make them see it. Make them believe it, because it happens to be true." Serene's pulse raced with a volatile mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'll need the emerald gown," she heard herself say. "The one that started everything." "It's already being pressed." Isolde squeezed her hands once more. "My son chose well, Serene Fairfax. Now show London why." 2 hours later, dressed in emerald silk and borrowed diamonds, Serene climbed into the Thornfield carriage alone. Her hands trembled against the velvet seat. But beneath the fear, something else burned bright and fierce. Defiance, determination. The same spark that had made her stand up to Lady Whitmore in that dress shop so many weeks ago. She had entered this arrangement desperate and invisible. She would not leave it cowering in shadows. The murmur of conversation died the instant Serene appeared in the doorway of Lady Whitmore's drawing room. 50 pairs of eyes fixed upon her. 50 faces registered shock, curiosity, calculation, and in some cases, undisguised hostility. Lady Whitmore herself stood near the fireplace like a queen holding court. Ambrose Vane positioned at her side like a favored courtier. Both of them had frozen mid-sentence, clearly not expecting this particular development. Serene had never felt more alone in her entire life. Miss Fairfax. Lady Whitmore recovered first, her smile sharp as shattered glass. What an unexpected pleasure. I don't recall sending you an invitation to this gathering. You didn't. Serene's voice emerged steadier than she felt, carrying clearly across the silent room. But I understand you're planning to discuss my engagement. I thought it only proper that I be present to contribute to the conversation. A ripple of whispers ran through the assembled guests. Ambrose's eyes narrowed with something between surprise and calculation. Reassessing this woman he had clearly underestimated. How delightfully bold. His tone dripped with false admiration. Come to defend your arrangement before I expose it, Miss Fairfax? Or perhaps to confess its true nature and throw yourself upon society's mercy? Neither. Serene moved further into the room, acutely aware of every eye following her progress. I've come to tell you all a story. The true story of how I came to be engaged to the Duke of Thornfield. Lady Whitmore's smile turned predatory with anticipation. By all means, my dear. We're absolutely fascinated to hear your version of events. Serene drew a deep breath. This was it. Everything she and Caius had built, everything they might still become, hung on the next few minutes. 3 months ago, I walked into Madame Fontaine's dress shop, not to buy anything, for I couldn't afford even a ribbon, but simply to look, to remember what it felt like to dream of beautiful things. She let her gaze travel slowly across the assembled faces, meeting eyes that had judged her, dismissed her, and looked through her for years. Some of you were there that day. You saw me humiliated, mocked, told I didn't belong among ladies of quality. Lady Whitmore's smile flickered uncertainly. What you didn't see was what happened next. A man I'd never met walked into that shop and did something remarkable. He didn't rescue me because I was beautiful, or accomplished, or advantageous to him. He chose me because he saw something worth choosing. Courage, perhaps, or stubbornness, or simply a woman who refused to be crushed by cruelty. A touching tale, Ambrose interrupted, his voice sharp, but it doesn't explain the money, the convenient timing of payments to your family, the commercial nature of, the Duke helped my family because he is a good man. Serene cut him off, her voice ringing clear, because he understood that loving someone means caring about the people they love. Is that concept so incomprehensible to you, Mr. Vane, that someone might act from generosity rather than calculation? Ambrose's face darkened with fury. I won't pretend our story is conventional, Serene continued, her voice gaining strength. We didn't meet at a ball or through proper introductions. Our courtship didn't follow society's prescribed patterns. But the feelings we developed, the respect, the partnership, the love, her voice caught on the word, raw with truth. Those are real. More real than any scandal you could manufacture. The room had gone utterly silent. Not even the rustle of silk or the clink of teacups broke the stillness. You may choose to believe Mr. Vane's insinuations, Serene finished quietly. You may choose to see me as a fortune hunter and the Duke as a fool. But I know the truth of what exists between us, and so does he. That's enough for us. She turned to leave, heart pounding, entirely uncertain whether she had accomplished anything beyond hastening her own destruction. And stopped, because standing in the doorway, still in his parliamentary clothes with his cravat askew from obvious haste, was Caius, His expression was unreadable. His gray eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath completely. "Caius," she whispered. He crossed the room in 5 long strides, took her face gently in both hands, and kissed her. In front of everyone, in front of Lady Whitmore and Ambrose, and 50 of London's most dedicated gossips. When he finally pulled back, his voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "I believe my fiancé has said everything that needs to be said. We'll be leaving now." And with that, he took her hand and led her out into the light. The carriage ride back to Thornfield House passed in charged silence. Serene couldn't stop trembling. The aftermath of adrenaline, the shock of what had just happened, the uncertainty of what came next, all of it combined into a tremor she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried. Caius held her hand throughout the journey, his grip firm and warm and steady. He didn't speak until they were inside his private study, the door firmly closed against the world. "How much did you hear?" Serene asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enough." He released her hand to pour 2 glasses of brandy from the crystal decanter on his desk. "I arrived in time to hear you tell an entire room full of vipers that you love me." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I didn't precisely use those words. You said it." He pressed a glass into her trembling fingers. "You stood alone in enemy territory, surrounded by people who wanted nothing more than to see you destroyed. And you declared it to everyone who had ever questioned your worth. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was to witness? How magnificent? I had to do something. Ambrose was going to... I know exactly what Ambrose was planning." Caius's jaw tightened. "I've spent the last 3 hours dealing with the legal implications of his schemes. My solicitors have reviewed every piece of so-called evidence he's gathered. It's circumstantial at best, defamatory at worst. He has nothing that would hold up to serious scrutiny. But society doesn't require legal proof to destroy someone. Society just witnessed the Duke of Thornfield kiss his fiancée in front of 50 of the Tun's most influential gossips." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I suspect that will be the primary topic of conversation for the foreseeable future, not Ambrose's petty accusations." Serene took a shaky sip of brandy, feeling it burn a path of warmth down her throat. "You shouldn't have done that. People will talk." People were already talking. Now they're talking about how obviously besotted I am with you. He moved closer, taking the glass from her fingers and setting it aside. "Which happens to be the absolute truth. Caius, let me finish. Please." His hands found hers again, holding them gently. "I told you 3 days ago that what I feel is real. You said the same. And then we've spent 72 hours dancing around it, avoiding each other, afraid to acknowledge what's actually happening between us. And what is actually happening? I'm in love with you." The words were simple and devastating and completely undeniable. Not as part of an arrangement, not because of proximity or performance or convenience. "I love you, Serene Fairfax. Your mind that challenges me constantly, your courage that humbles me, your terrible humming when you think no one is listening, your refusal to be impressed by my title or intimidated by my wealth. All of it. Everything you are." Tears spilled down her cheeks, warm and unstoppable. "I was supposed to be temporary, a business arrangement. Nothing more. Plans change." He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away her tears. "People change. What starts as one thing becomes something else entirely. Marry me, Serene. Not in 3 months when the arrangement officially ends. Not to satisfy legal requirements or thwart Ambrose's schemes. Marry me because you want to spend your life with me. Because what we found together is worth keeping. I don't bring anything to this marriage. No fortune, no connections, no... You bring everything." His voice cracked with emotion. "You bring honesty when I'm surrounded by flattery. Challenge when everyone else simply agrees with whatever I say. Joy when I'd forgotten what it felt like to genuinely laugh. You think you came to me with nothing? He shook his head. Seren, you gave me back parts of myself I'd buried so deep, I'd forgotten they existed. She was crying properly now, tears streaming freely down her face. I'm terrified. Of wanting this. Of believing it's real. So am I. But I'm more terrified of losing you. He drew her closer. I'm not promising perfection. I'm promising partnership. Someone who will stand beside you in hostile drawing rooms and quiet libraries. Someone who will argue philosophy with you at midnight and bring you chocolate in the morning. Someone who will love you, stubbornly and imperfectly, and completely, for as long as you'll have me. Every fear she had carried for months was still there, hovering at the edges of her consciousness. Nothing had magically resolved. Nothing was certain or safe. But beneath all of it, stronger than all of it, was a single undeniable truth. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, really marry you. Not because of arrangements or circumstances or money, but because I love you. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you make me brave enough to want things I'd stopped believing I deserved. The kiss that followed was a seal on promises made, tender and fierce and absolutely honest. They married within the week at Thornfield's private chapel, with Isolde weeping happy tears and a small gathering of those who truly mattered. Seren wore the emerald gown, altered slightly to serve as a wedding dress. Ambrose departed London shortly afterward, his schemes in ruins, his hopes of inheritance extinguished by a love story he had accidentally helped create. That night, Caius held her in the darkness of their shared chamber, and Seren felt something she hadn't experienced in years beyond counting. Safety. Belonging. Home. Any regrets? He murmured against her hair. Only that I wasted so much time being afraid. You weren't afraid. You were careful. There's a difference. He kissed her temple gently. You're the bravest person I've ever known. She turned in his arms to face him. I love you. I know. His smile was visible even in shadow. You told a room full of society's worst gossips, rather publicly, as I recall. You kissed me in front of them. I'd do it again, every single day, if necessary. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who had entered an arrangement expecting nothing and found absolutely everything. Mama! Mama! Papa says we can have cake before dinner if you say yes! Seren looked up from her correspondence to find her 4-year-old son, Marcus, barreling toward her with all the subtlety of a small hurricane. Behind him, at a considerably more dignified pace, came Caius, carrying their 2-year-old daughter, Rosalind, who had somehow managed to get strawberry jam not only in her dark curls, but also on her father's previously immaculate waistcoat. Does Papa indeed? Seren raised an eyebrow at her husband. How convenient that Papa's generous offers always require my approval. I said, if Mama agrees. Caius's expression was perfectly innocent, in a way that fooled absolutely no one. I made no actual promises. I merely presented possibilities. You're teaching our children to negotiate using intermediaries. I'm not entirely certain that's an appropriate skill for a 4-year-old. Nonsense. It's an essential life skill. Marcus, tell your mother what you learned today. That Mama always has final authority, Marcus recited solemnly, clearly having practiced this particular phrase. Authority, Seren corrected automatically, then caught Caius's poorly concealed smirk. And you're both impossible. You love us anyway. She did. 5 years of marriage had only deepened what they'd discovered in those first complicated months. The passion had matured, but not diminished. The partnership had strengthened through every challenge and triumph, and the friendship that had begun in late-night library conversations had become the foundation upon which everything else was built. No cake before dinner, Serene announced, then relented at Marcus's theatrical expression of devastation. But perhaps an extra story at bedtime, if certain small people eat all their vegetables without complaint. Marcus's face transformed with joy. I'll eat everything, even the horrible green things. They're called peas, darling. They're horrible. Caius deposited Rosalind, jam and all, onto Saren's lap with a grin. I'll take the master negotiator to wash up. You manage the sticky one. Left alone with her daughter, Seren pressed a kiss to Rosalind's jam-scented curls. The little girl had Caius's gray eyes and Seren's copper hair, a combination that made her startlingly beautiful, even at 2 years old. Your father thinks he's terribly clever, Seren murmured. Papa, Rosalind agreed solemnly, which was her response to most statements involving her favorite person. Through the window, Seren could see the gardens of Thornfield House, now scattered with toys and evidence of children's adventures. Isolde lived in the dower house nearby, close enough to spoil her grandchildren shamelessly, but far enough to give the young family their privacy. It was a far cry from the crumbling manor where Seren had grown up. That house had been fully restored now, her parents living there in comfortable security, her father finally free of the crushing weight that had aged him so terribly. Her brother Tobias had completed his education with honors and was making a name for himself in law, all because she had once walked into a dress shop she couldn't afford and refused to be crushed by cruelty. Your Grace, Harwick appeared in the doorway, as dignified as ever, despite his now entirely silver hair. A letter has arrived, from Lady Whitmore. Seren's eyebrows rose. She and Lady Whitmore had achieved a cold but civil detente over the years, but they were hardly correspondents. How unexpected. She opened the letter with one hand, still balancing Rosalind on her lap. Your Grace, I find myself in the uncomfortable position of requiring a favor. My daughter Arabella, whom you may remember from years past, has made an unfortunate attachment to a man I suspect of being a fortune hunter. I am seeking advice from someone who understands the difference between genuine attachment and mercenary interest. I am aware we have not always been friends. I am aware, too, that I once treated you abominably. But I have watched your marriage over these years, and I have been forced to acknowledge that I was wrong about you. Wrong about everything. If you could spare an hour of your time, I would be grateful. Lady Whitmore. Everything all right? Caius reappeared, Marcus now clean and considerably calmer. Lady Whitmore wants my advice about her daughter's engagement. Lady Whitmore, he paused. The woman who told you to know your place. The very same. Will you help her? Seren considered the question carefully. 5 years ago, she might have savored the irony of Lady Whitmore humbling herself. The woman had been cruel and dismissive when Seren was at her lowest point, but 5 years had taught her important lessons about mercy, about how circumstances could humble anyone, about the grace of offering kindness to those who perhaps hadn't earned it. Yes, she said finally, I'll help her. You're a considerably better person than I am. I know. She smiled up at him. But you're improving with age. He laughed and kissed her, heedless of watching children. Marcus made exaggerated sounds of disgust. Rosalind clapped her sticky hands with delight. I love you, Caius said against her lips. Only 3 times today. You're falling behind your usual standard. I'll make it up tonight. She watched him carry Marcus toward the nursery, her heart impossibly full. 5 years ago, she had been invisible, overlooked, written off by a society that valued fortune over character. Now she was a duchess, a mother, a partner to a man who saw her completely and loved her without reservation. All because she had refused to be crushed. All because a stranger in a dress shop had looked at her and seen something worth choosing. The emerald gown still hung in her wardrobe. She wore it every anniversary, a reminder of where they'd begun and how far they'd come. Some stories started with lies. The best ones ended with truth, and theirs, Seren knew with absolute certainty, was only just beginning.